Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, taking the time for this month's Detect to Protect webinar. My name is Kim Schofield. I am from Stamus Networks and will be moderating the webinar today and managing any questions you might have at the conclusion of our session. Today, we are joined by Mark Durrett, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, and Peter Manev, our Chief Strategy Officer. They'll be presenting the information to you today. So just as a reminder, our session is being recorded, and we will be sending out a link to the recording along with the slides. That'll go out early next week in an email, along with some additional information that we'll talk about at the conclusion of the webinar. And also, if you'd like to ask any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen, to type in your questions, and we will take those when we finish up. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the session over to Mark.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining. So as cyber attacks become more prevalent and sophisticated, traditional security solutions are really finding it difficult to keep up. And we've all heard about high-profile data breaches. And the reality is that every organization is a potential target. So in today's session, we're going to be exploring network detection and response and endpoint detection and response. And we'll really zoom in a little bit initially on endpoint detection and response as it has left some blind spots within your network. And we'll talk a little bit about how network-based detection and response can fill those gaps. I'll give a brief introduction, and then my colleague Peter Manev will walk you through some really interesting real-world examples. So let's see. So the threat landscape has really evolved. When we typically think of cyber attacks, we think of an attack that compromises a server, a database, a workstation, a laptop, or similar device to access sensitive data or gain access to other systems. But in our experience with our customers, we're seeing a dramatic increase in attacks against non-traditional targets, systems that are sort of not your standard computing platforms, whether that's operational technology or other devices on the network, including network infrastructure devices themselves, etc. And this really poses a problem for endpoint monitoring. And that's really because endpoint detection systems require an agent. And that doesn't really help you on systems that can't support agents. And so we're also seeing an expansion in the attack surface of these agentless systems that can't be defended by endpoint systems. So in a heavy environment where people bring their own devices, it's really difficult to install some sort of software agent on everyone's device. Internet of Things devices that are sitting on the network, maybe as sensors or control systems, etc., that, again, you can't install an agent. Network devices. We've really seen a rise in attacks against actual network infrastructure devices like switches and routers and wireless access points and gateways. Another really important area is operational technology, systems like industrial control systems and systems that are managing other critical infrastructures like traffic lights, like, well, all sorts of things that are not, again, traditional endpoints that can support an agent installation. Medical devices, another critical piece. A lot of these are not built on standard computing platforms, and they are not extensible in the sense that you can't put a custom agent on them. Another one that we're starting to see a lot of is environments where there are Google Chromebooks, which has a sort of super lightweight internet operating system. Can't put an agent on those systems either. So Peter, what would you say in our experience has been sort of the ratio of systems that are not able to operate an endpoint agent. You were quoting
Oh,
something the other day.
yeah, actually, in deployments that we regularly in our deployments we regularly observe that is actually there's this gap between 20 and 30% of devices that are unknown to the IT or security teams, and we're like, okay, so these actually don't have some point of some way of endpoint or antivirus protection or similar things like that.
Yeah.
There's a that's always in every single deployment where we walk into. Yeah.
Yeah, so more, 20, 30, 40% and up, which is which is kind of scary. So the other interesting thing about endpoint security is that attackers are really starting to find ways to evade detection by those endpoint systems. I've got a clip here from Dark Reading that just, I think it was last week, this story about Black Mamba, a keylogging attack, was able to evade endpoint detection. In fact, there are entire books written on how to defeat endpoint detection systems. So this is it's a weak spot, it's a gap that really needs to be closed. And so how do you close it? Well, the network ultimately is the ground truth for what's happening inside the organization. And that's how you close that gap. So it really provides, by monitoring the network, it provides the most complete visibility into serious threats and unauthorized activity that are taking place in the organization. Gives you critical insight into all enterprise activity. When we talk about network, we're really talking about sort of the complete network. So a lot of workloads are now hosted in the cloud, but there's still a lot of on-premise networks. And those can be monitored using network monitoring tools. And it really gives you this sort of impartial view of what's happening across all the hosts and all the inter-host communication. And it's really the only way to monitor and observe activity on some of those systems that I just talked about, the operational technologies, Internet of Things, et cetera. And this can be done. The beauty part about network monitoring is it can be done without agents, and it has no impact on the host performance, which sometimes agents cause a degradation in performance on those endpoints. So through network monitoring, you can get an early warning on the intrusion and the installation of malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, all this stuff, insider attacks, and even more. So the kinds of attack signals that you can monitor from the network are sort of intrusions from the outside, as well as command and control communications, and then movement from one system to the next system inside an organization. So that's a super typical attack pattern. Once an attacker gains a beachhead in an organization, they scan the network and they typically move laterally within the organization. And then ultimately, one of the objectives of many attacks is exfiltration of sensitive data. All of those attack signals can be monitored from the network. Now, there's a bonus impact of monitoring the network, and that is really the ability to identify unauthorized activity and shadow IT and policy violations, and also identify even vulnerable systems that are installed in the network or versions of systems that are more vulnerable than others. All this can be observed from the network. So what's required to really do a good job of network-based threat detection and response? Well, first it starts with detection. And the most sophisticated detections or detection systems use multiple mechanisms. And so things like machine learning, other statistical anomaly detection, signatures, IOC matching, et cetera. And that really helps uncover these hidden threats and can give you detection and immediate detection on day one. The next important thing is that the detection be transparent and explainable. The results, once a detection event has been triggered, you really need to understand what happened, dig in deeply, the ability to understand what happened and communicate those results. You can't really have a sort of mysterious detection event in sort of a black box way. Now, the other thing that's really important is if you have high fidelity detection, you can automate an incident response. And so you can do that through an endpoint, triggering a system in an endpoint detection response system to, for example, quarantine a system. But the reason you do that is because you got to move fast. These attacks move quickly, and this high fidelity allows you to have the confidence to jump in and automatically respond. The other really important thing in a sophisticated network detection response system is the ability to do hunting. So there's a lot of, most experts recognize that automated detection has its limitations. You can't really detect everything. And so you have to be able to go through and hunt through the data, especially if you suspect something is happening or you're interested in understanding if an attack that maybe you read about through a peer or a CVE that was posted, for example, you need to go back in and look at your network and figure out whether or not you've been compromised in any way by this vulnerability or this type of attack. Another important element is openness and extensibility, so that we all recognize that network detection and response is not going to address every problem in your security infrastructure, not going to produce every control. So you really have to integrate in with other systems. And then lastly, the system needs to be able to help you control where your sensitive data lives. You don't really want to ship your logs out to third-party systems and keep all your data within your organization, and in many cases inside your country of origin. So that's really all I had to sort of start the conversation here, and I'd like to hand it over to Peter, who is going to give you some real-world examples of attacks and breaches that evaded detection and can evade detection with endpoint systems, and then how NDR helps solve those problems. So, Peter?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And folks, thanks for tuning in. As Mark mentioned, I'm going to walk you through some examples of most of them real-world case scenarios, that also I participate in. Kind of stories from the trenches as our background, or mine at least, that I'm very proud of is technical and not just conceptual. So I'm going to try to reinforce with real case scenarios what Mark said, and also hopefully give you ideas of points where you should point your attention to if you already haven't done so. So let's have a look. Well, preparing for optimal outcomes, we need to work together. Like all the teams in the security operations need to work together. All the teams in the infrastructure operations need to work together. All those groups need to work together. We actually have each other for support. So it's not about this team or this tool for themselves. It's about actually doing a common effort. One big point of that common effort, actually, I think, is first of all, you can't protect what you don't know it's there, what you don't know it exists. And often enough in our deployments, we just highlight usually networks, hosts, services, things like that. Actually, security ops or network operations or IT operations were not aware of. And like, oh, okay, we actually do not know that's happening there. And it's good to know. It brings in visibility, so hence you can actually enhance it with security controls if you need to. There are plenty of situations where endpoint is beyond reach, and Mark mentioned some of these. I participated in endpoint rollout projects as well as NDR rollout projects, and both have pros and cons. In a lot of cases, some endpoint protection or antivirus or EPPs cannot be rolled out, switched on, deployed. It really depends on the environment and so on and so forth. There's complex environments out there and projects. And mainly in industries such as educational, government, military, automotive, financial. There's plenty of such examples where actually we can be presented with quite substantial challenges when we try to roll out endpoint protection, or when we try to actually enforce it with a one model fit all, let's say, or similar things. So Mark, next one please. And basically going to answering some basic questions and actually knowing what to expect from an environment that goes a long way. So things like CVEs, misconfigurations, legacy operating systems that are no longer supported by the vendors. That's the norm. This is normal in IT infrastructure today. We actually need to work together and actually defend that. So that's no news. That's not a sticker shock. We have those environments. We need to protect them. We need to enable the business. So by doing that, we actually often enough, simple questions go a long way, and sometimes the simplest questions are actually not so easy to answer. And we have a few examples of them here. Mark, next, please, if you don't mind. So we have some very basic, if you will, and those are kind of from some of our deployments. For example, do we actually have clear text communication in production networks? That's a very simple question that is very difficult to answer in lots of cases. Because we need to actually list them out and know, like, this is a clear text. It could be all sorts of different protocols, but it's in the clear, and it shouldn't be in the clear. Could be misconfiguration, could be just because of a legacy application. Doesn't matter. We need to know to be able to protect. We need to bring that visibility. Is there, and this is to the level of actually with the details that we need, not just based on a port. Okay, this is port 80, so it must be HTTP. There's different things that we need to understand. One of them is actually all the details around it, not just port and IP-based communication or flow record-based communication, so to speak. Okay, is there FTP, SMTP used? So the amount of times we actually discover that when we roll out is probably 99%. Because we actually go and say, hey, by the way, there's FTP, there's files getting transferred, including from public internal networks towards internal networks. It's clear text SMTP. Folks were simply not aware, and they were very thankful for understanding and for us being able to highlight and get them to understand that. So that goes a long way, because, again, what I was mentioning earlier, you can't protect what you don't know is there. So now they're aware, and now they're like, okay, we need to work towards that. The amount of times that this is happening, no, without exaggeration, 99%, as I said before, is usually something unknown like that. Are we using self-signed certificates in production? Maybe public facing. What's the list? What are the production infrastructure that is doing that? Are we supposed to do that? Is DNS over HTTPS actually really blocked on the infrastructure? Can we confirm that? I mean, yes, okay, it's blocked by different means, but is that really the case? Sort of an audit. Interesting questions that we also regularly get is, okay, do we have unauthorized proxy services or proxies in the environment? Be it could be malicious activity, it could be policy violation, it could be just of the type of shadow IT. Where is endpoint protection not installed to, but it's supposed to be installed? That's also a difficult question to answer that we can answer. And I'll be walking you through some of those examples as we move along now. Next, please. And so the example that I'm going to walk you through are lateral movement, data exfiltration, critical network infrastructure, spyware, and what's actually the areas that are not covered by security tools, the gap, how we breach that gap. So let's take them one by one and see what we can get that. Now, as you see on the slide, from the trenches, we actually, even though that's just I use that a lot as an example because it was well-known vulnerability. It occurred a few years back ago, and it made big noise back then, right up there with Log4j. But the printer spool vulnerability, that was an unusual one because actually vulnerabilities and CVEs get actually more and more disclosed, and there were certain periods, months of time where there was actually no patching. And this basically vulnerability kind of allowed for remote code execution. And so in a lot of cases, the only thing that you can actually do there is basically enforce extra controls on network communication to and from these devices. And with that, actually do security monitoring, because it was very easy actually to monitor the network traffic and say, okay, this is happening and this is not happening, where possibility to install endpoint protection was not actually viable. And so how NDR helped in our case, because we actually had a lot of users and customers affected by that, and we helped them out by way of, okay, so this type of communication should never happen. If it happens, automatically escalate it. And doesn't necessarily mean that it's happening from the vulnerability scanners. It means that no, from anything else, we want to know these specific cases. If that happens, escalate it. And we were actually able to be very successful in actually monitoring very tightly, very closely all these vulnerable devices while waiting for months, as I said, on security patches and vulnerabilities patching and change management and all those sorts of things to kick in. Because in a lot of cases, also, it's about change management too. In some cases, it's not possible to do immediately change management on the fly. It's just not possible because the follow-up or the resulting actions could actually be prohibitive for the business, let's say. Next, please. So let's have a look at the next case. This one is a very interesting one. It has basically the abbreviation APT involved, Advanced Persistent Threat. So we were actually observing in the thing a case of actor that actually shared a lot of similarities with the information disclosed by Microsoft recently, them being attacked by a state-sponsored actor called Midnight Blizzard. So we actually observed similar to that proliferation, where actually a test infrastructure was brute force the password stolen or guessed rather. And actually that same test infrastructure was used as a staging point to develop a lateral movement discovery and subsequent lateral discovery, and subsequent lateral movement, which actually basically was due just because the EDR was actually misconfigured or not, let's say, enforced in full just because that was a test server. So things like that always happen, and that's where actually network detection response is helpful because it helps bridge that gap. Never count just on one tool, on one security measure. You always have to have an overlapping or supplemental measure. So in this case, we were able to actually highlight unique previously unseen communication from that server. And by unique previously unseen communication, I mean in the whole organization. It was like, okay, that's a unique communication, and we quickly were able to see that this is coming from the test infrastructure, observing a direct download, which was very unusual, especially when something was supposed to be decommissioned. And what made it really, really, really uncomfortable after that is was the actual lateral movement itself, the configurational changes that occurred from that server, simply because they were not supposed to be occurring from there. They're supposed to be coming from other places, management infrastructure and so on. But they were actually coming in from that test machine. And simply that automatically raised the flag. So things like that are not supposed to happen. Let me show you another case. Oh, no, rather than show you, explain another case. Next, please. So this one is actually, there was a couple of examples here in this group, in this one group, that we think are quite significant. It basically comes down to critical network infrastructure being exploited, and it is expected to be the trend for this next year and subsequent years. Why? Because those are critical devices commanding basically the whole communication for the whole organization or infrastructure. If they're down, everything else pretty much is down. Couple of examples include last year the CVE announced by Barracuda, and it was actually recommended by Barracuda and FBI to replace the devices. So not simply patch them, because apparently they weren't patchable, but to replace them. So you can actually gauge the severity in there. And while replacing is happening, you can't just simply sit and wait without doing nothing. You have to know, you have to monitor if such an attempt has happened, or if it has occurred in the past, for example, if such attempts have occurred in the past. And those are critical infrastructure attacks against gateways, VPN concentrators, switches, routers, firewalls, all those things that you can actually not really install an endpoint protection. Another such an example is the VSAT modem attack, where actually modems that were critical for the whole infrastructure and company were bricked, or in other words, the term is used for when the devices were rendered unusable. So cannot be rebooted, cannot be restarted, cannot be patched, bricked, done. They need to be replaced, damaged, permanently damaged beyond repair. So we can, of course, go into details and try to analyze why is this happening, or who is the perpetrator, or what's the benefit of that. But nonetheless, that still leaves us with the problematic of there's something out there that is critical to our communication, and we almost have no other means of actively monitoring and responsive to a threat to those devices, no other means other than a network detection and response. That's where that's where the help comes in highlighting those occurrences, and as I mentioned before, not just highlighting any future occurrences, but you also need to answer the question of, has this happened before? Did it happen last week? Did it happen last month? Has such an attempt actually happened? From where? Why? Was it successful? All those things need to be answered. Because usually when something comes up to light, it's like, okay, great. We look forward to actually securing in the future, making sure we patch for this, but has it happened before? Next one, please. And we have just recently in February another such case where a FortiOS announced a vulnerability pretty high, where actually specially crafted HTTP request was enough to allow an authenticated attacker remote code execution. And this is actually worrying because it's just crafting that request and sending it over, at least based on the information that was shared. So yes, you use extra network security controls in terms of, let's say, firewalling, routing, and switching, to prohibit such traffic or similar things. Yes, you can do that. But you also need to know, is that actually actively happening? Is somebody trying to do that? Has it happened in the past, and things like that? And the simplest, the easiest way to do that is just to look at the NDR logs and be like, okay, so something like this has happened in the past, or no, it hasn't. And we're actively looking for it. And if something like that happens, we want to automatically escalate it to the appropriate security teams for further investigation, because those are actually critical devices. These things continue to happen, and they will happen, and that's as I mentioned, the norm. We're here to protect, so we have to be ready with the right tools. Next one, please. So here is also another good example from the trenches again. And this one was from actually a school where they were actually using GPO policies. They were Windows-based infrastructure. They were using GPO policies to enforce certain settings, controls, and similar. And this comes back to a little bit of the trust but verify, pardon me, question. Actually, okay, so the current case there was like, our GPO policy says no DNS over HTTPS is allowed on the browsers. Great. Is that the case? So that's what that's the question that you also is good to ask yourself. Okay, something is forbidden. Is that the case everywhere, or there is something left? And in our case here, we were actually, they were very interested about the so-called policy violations. If according to their security policy, of course, if some policy violations occurred, and we were able actually to list them out and say, hey, by the way, there is actually DOH here being used from end clients, and you folks mentioned that this is prohibited on GPO level. So, but that's not what we see. So basically, spyware was actually could be allowed via the browser plugins, and the reason for that was just misconfigured host or not properly pushed security settings. So that's where actually helping each other comes in. That's part, an example of the gap that we're trying to bridge, and how we can help each other out. It's not about do it all with one tool, do it all with one team or one person. It's about actually doing it together and verifying that controls are in place. Actually, next one, please. So this one is a very interesting one as well. There was a simple question, large financial institution, and they said, any security vendor controls that were out there as in the top-notch listed ones were there. And the security team actually had a simple question. They said, we want to know where is EDR not installed, and it should have been installed. So they actually wanted to know, give us a list of all endpoints, all the end client PCs or server infrastructure, whatever it may be, that are supposed to have EDR, but it's not installed. And of course, you cannot come up with that inventory from the EDR system itself, because you can only install it where it could be installed. There's so much that you don't know, for example. And the way we figured that one out for them was actually pretty simple, more simple than they expected, I must admit. In our security platform, we are able to actually determine network services being served from a host or used from a host. And what the endpoint detection and response and endpoint and EPP points software did was actually they were using a specific agent, of course, actually using network updates and specific services. So we were actually able to list all their end clients that actually don't have that network service running. And simply couldn't tell that with the EDR itself, because the EDR is not installed in there. So we were able to list them out and say, okay, these here, and they were about 10% in the time, these 10% actually don't have either the agent active, or they just don't have the EDR agent installed in there. So they were actually very thankful that they actually can bridge that gap. They didn't know it existed. They were just wondering at the beginning. It started as almost a little bit like a funny question. I'm like, well, how do we know if everything is, installed and covered? Like, okay, like challenges like that. So in this case, that's how we were able to help out. Very, very useful for them and for coverage and for minimizing the risk, actually. Okay, so actionable insights. What are those? What can we take away from all the basically the highlights that I've been trying to share in here? Well, first of all, combining both EDR and NDR goes a long way, right? So they help each other out. You'll be surprised of the much better and greater coverage that you can do. NDR is capable of providing the big picture, answering the big questions, and then covering where EDR cannot, and vice versa, of course. So NDR is very good into identifying suspicious behavior that naturally EDR might miss, just because NDR is actually specializing on network traffic specifically. That could, NDR itself could actually trigger further response. It could trigger an incident response ticket or a case being open. It could trigger an endpoint quarantine, an endpoint software to quarantine or network quarantine that specific, let's say, endpoint. And vice versa, EDR can actually come in and ask the network detection response system, like, hey, have you seen anywhere that on the network that I don't have access to, or I don't know of, and things like that. So that's where the combination comes in to be very, very, very useful. So using high confidence NDR detections to automatically trigger those responses is essential, because we're all sitting in plenty of incidents, in plenty of meetings, we have plenty of things to do, and actually allowing for customizable automation goes a long way, because there's no one infrastructure, there's no one organization like other. There might be similarities, but there's not exactly the same. So being able to actually provide automation with the needed customization or expected actually goes a much longer way, at least from my experience with all the security teams that I've worked with so far. So that will be the highlight here. Mark, did I miss something, or am I doing good so far?
I think, well, you're doing great, Peter.
All right, okay, thank you. Much appreciated. Okay. Or maybe one point actually that maybe I didn't mention was, in a lot of cases, you have these legacy systems or Lego operating systems that the vendors don't support anymore. So actually, when you have a security patch for a CV, let's say, that might not be applicable to an operating system version that is no longer supported by the vendor. So, for example, Microsoft or Cisco or Jupyter, it doesn't matter, whatever the vendor is, releases a security patch. However, they're releasing it only for the supported products, versions, and things. So at the end, if the most important thing is actually to be able to add additional security controls in there and monitor. With that being said, Mark, I think I transferred over to you.
Yeah, okay, great. Great stuff, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
While Peter mentioned, I think somewhere, that this wasn't really going to be we're not trying to sell you anything today. I did want to take a minute to introduce Stamus Networks for those of you who don't know us. So Stamus is helping some of the world's most targeted organizations use their network to secure their organizations. These include financial institutions, governments, central banks, critical infrastructure providers, etc. We are almost 10 years old and headquartered jointly in the United States and in Europe. And we have a team that's dispersed in 8 countries, actually. And these global enterprises that are our customers are pretty widespread as well. Now, one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet, but the system that we've built and our team has been tested and proven in a number of NATO cyber exercises, because we've been for over 5 years participating in a number of the CCDCOE exercises, including locked shields and crossed swords. And this really helps us prove the new detection technologies and other techniques that we have created and beta tested in those environments, and then roll them out to all these customers, which has been super helpful. Now, we are the world's leader in Suricata-based network security. We have a big ethos around open source and have created a number of open source projects, including Selks, which is a fully turnkey Suricata-based network security platform. We've been recognized by Gartner in their coverage of NDR, including their market guide for NDR. And I just want to introduce a little bit about the Stamus security platform, which is our flagship product. It is a network-based threat detection and response solution, and it's really focused on trying to delivering powerful, actionable network visibility and threat detection across your infrastructure, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, or on-premise. And some of the areas where the system really excels are in providing high fidelity detections that are transparent, easily understandable, and explainable, and then backing those detections up with extensive correlated network data and evidence, along with organizational context. The system is super open, very extensible, recognizing that it is not the only solution in your security stack, so it has to be integrated in, and it's really built to scale in very large enterprise operations. So hundreds of gigabits per second, millions of hosts, etc. Another really important element that we believe is unique to the Stamus security platform is that all of its detection capabilities, including its machine learning and anomaly detection, is possible in a completely air-gapped deployment. So doesn't need to have internet access. Doesn't need a SaaS analytics console to operate, and that gives our customers the complete control over all of their data. We mentioned at the very beginning with this concept of data sovereignty, and that's really important for some of the super sensitive organizations that are deploying our solution. So let's see. Oh yeah, okay, real quick. The system comprises two pieces: the Stamus Network Probe, which is deployed out in the networks and monitoring network activity. That can be in a on-premise network, in a cloud environment, whether it's data center or public cloud, and also can monitor operational technology and industrial control system environments. And then those probes feed the telemetry up into the Stamus central server. That can be deployed either on-premise or in a public cloud or private cloud instance. Again, it's not this does not have to be deployed as a SaaS application to get the full benefit of the system, so you can control it, deploy it where you need it to. And then the whole system integrates in with a number of other systems to automate response, including ticketing, and quarantine and direct response actions. So yeah, so that's Stamus Networks and the Stamus security platform. We have a bunch of additional resources that we will share with you after the webinar. And anyone who has registered and attended the webinar is going to get links to some case studies and a document which we think does a really good job of describing the various components of the detection and response space: endpoint detection and response, network detection and response, and extended detection and response. So we're going to share those with you. Our website, of course, has a number of resources, including that are covered in a resource library, as well as a blog our blog with over 200 articles, 5 or 6 of which that are specifically geared towards these topics. And then we talked a lot about individual breaches and attacks and that sort of thing. And we've got some reference material here for you. And this will be part of the presentation that we share following this webinar. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Kim to lead us through the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully
So
we've got some questions.
we do actually. We have quite a few. So yeah, get ready, Peter.
What? There's questions? I
There
didn't
are
sign up for that. What?
questions.
No
Yeah, we
way.
have some really good ones. We have some really good ones, actually. All right. So
Okay.
first up, so how do you discover all hosts? Do you use some sort of scanning?
No scanning, no agents. It's just by analyzing the network traffic. It is quite revealing what you can see on the network, and how you can actually draw a picture of what's inside the network when you're actually using an NDR system or a network security monitoring tool. There's, again, as I said, there's no scanning, there's no agents. We actually do a lot of traffic analysis, the so-called traffic analysis routines, to be able to determine what is happening on an endpoint in terms of network perspective and fingerprinting. We can actually draw a very good picture. You can deduct that from the network traffic. It's the network traffic that is the most important part. All of that is deducted from there. Services, host names, usernames, level of encryption, all those things could actually be observed on the network. You'll be surprised what you can see there. Without exaggeration.
Peter, how many? I think just this. I think it's relevant, but just in terms of the data that we're able to collect and monitor associated with every host, how many data elements do you think that we track for every host?
Oh, a lot. I think it's over 50 or 60 unique different ones. So it really also depends on the network and the type of deployment, but it could be easily, without exaggeration, millions of hosts, and we need to track all that, all those elements individually for each host, which is quite doable, as we have a proven track record, of which I'm very proud of.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So the next question is about clear text communications within an organization. So why would that be a problem?
Well, if it can be seen traversing the network and it's in clear text, imagine if it's intellectual property or personal data privacy or corporate secret, organizational secret, and similar things. If it can be seen on the network, it means, in clear text, it means that anybody actually that is on the network has the possibility to actually see it as well. Pardon me. And in a lot of cases, this is also related to usernames, passwords, or documents being transferred. And the problematic is there not only if somebody is able to actually sniff and look at things, the problematic is also there if the data or documents that are being transferred actually don't hold other information that might be critical to an enterprise, or to the people working there, or the people that enterprise is trying to protect, let's say. We have many adversaries on every single level: government, political, military, all those things. So, I mean, the sky's the limit here when it comes to adversaries. So they're not stupid. We should never underestimate them. And it's all about minimizing that risk. And one part of that is actually minimize that clear text communication that could be observed or tampered with. Yeah, so that's what it's all about, getting the visibility there and be like, okay, we should fix that.
Excellent. So this is a really good question. As we've used a lot of acronyms during the presentation, and of course, there are a lot of acronyms in cybersecurity. So just a quick explanation, if you could, the difference between NDR, EDR, and XDR.
Well, EDR is endpoint. Let's keep it really, really simple. EDR is endpoint, NDR is network, XDR will be the combination and orchestration automation of all these. So now EDR can actually do automation on its own, of course. NDR, network detection response, can do an automation on their own, or they're capable. But combining all these and actually putting it into an XDR system gives the, I think, best advantage when it comes to cyber defense.
Great, thank you.
And
All
I'll
right,
just
so
add that there's
go ahead.
there's that white paper that I referenced at the end that if anybody's interested can download and read.
Yeah, might be a good one to
absolutely
include. Okay, great. So next is, what are the best locations to put a network tap over a network?
All right. Do you want the bias answer of me? I say everywhere. No, but I mean, in general, in general, it's really important to understand the types of deployment that you have. In a lot of cases, it is not you're walking in to a deployment or infrastructure that you don't know of. There's some very usual, some of the biggest live fire cyber exercises that we participate in actually include scenarios like that. You walk into a non-breached environment, so you have to actually protect and make sure critical services is up and running. So having the advantage of knowing what's in there, great. Then you can actually, knowing your infrastructure, you can say, we need to put the network detection and response or network monitoring on all the communication points where most of the traffic converges, and also other monitoring points where actually, for example, if you have smaller offices or satellite offices or similar things, you can identify those spots where all the communication bubbles are happening. With infrastructure that you are actually not so aware of, or you don't have the background of this, you can actually use the network monitoring part to actually understand it better and actually kind of draw it as you're defending it and be like, okay, so this is, I have infrastructure here, I have servers there, I have network services being used there, and these look like SCADA or AOT devices, these look like end stations, these look like servers. In a lot of cases, this is the norm. So for example, in a lot of cases, because the infrastructure is so ever-changing, and because of this, actually, we also have another problem where security SOC teams actually, the people problem turnaround is quite big. So we have colleagues that are constantly turning around in the SOC teams, and knowledge is lost. So in a lot of cases, this actually also helps. That this is also one of the norms that we have to deal with. Assume that not always known in a network, so you have to actually kind of find it out and protect it. And one of the best ways to do that is the network visibility. Like, okay, what's going on in the network? What's communicating? Is that application really about to be retired, or is it still talking to something else? How can you answer that? You have to plug in and monitor. I took kind of the long way of answering your question, I think, but there is really difficult scenarios that you have to adapt as you go, I think. And then there is others where you have a pretty good, solid knowledge of the infrastructure that you're defending it, and then you can easily pinpoint communication bubbles or spots that you can deploy the network detection and response system.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Peter. So we do have a couple more. I think one maybe can be answered a little more quickly than the other. So let's see if we can fit those in. The first one is, are you recommending that organizations should not deploy EDR?
No, absolutely not. EDR is a must, no question about it. I'm just saying NDR is a must too, in order to provide as much as possible coverage. They help each other. That's it. What often enough, NDR doesn't have visibility in exactly what process or host is actually doing that specific network activity, and vice versa. Often enough, EDR cannot be deployed in all places and doesn't know, or doesn't have that good visibility inside the protocol layer of communication what is actually happening. So they help each other, not against each other. Help each other. That's it.
Excellent. All right. So last one that we have, let's go ahead and take it. So you mentioned CVEs. Can you elaborate on how NDR can detect a vulnerability? Or are you saying it can detect an attack against a vulnerability? So how do you identify those?
There's both, actually. I think there is the prelude to an attack, and there's also the actual known, let's say, exploit attempt. There's detections for both. You can observe for unusual or unique communication to and from devices when the actual detection for a specific CV or exploit hasn't come out yet, or when even there is none. Let's not forget that some of the best CVEs and exploits are not known to this day. That's why they're the best, because they haven't been made public. Just the very same as some of the worst breaches we probably don't know about because we don't know about. So I think it's twofold process. One is the actual CV detection that you can do on the network or on the endpoint, and be like, okay, this is the sequence, or these are the patterns that we're looking for, and if it happens, highlight it. The other one is to actually be a bit more proactive and do look at, for example, as often as I often enough do that when I'm hunting, which I love, is look for unique, unusual communication from critical infrastructure, or from points in the infrastructure where it's not supposed to happen. Goes a long way, at least in my experience anyway. You can be proactive a little bit about that, and not only do it manually but automate it. That's also where the tool comes to enable that effort as well.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Peter. So we are just about at the top of the hour. We don't have any other questions. So just want to say thank you to everyone again for joining us. Keep an eye out. Early next week, you'll receive an email with all the materials that we mentioned, as well as a recording and a copy of the slides. All right. So with that, we'll close things out. And thanks again,
Much
everyone.
appreciated, folks. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Take care. Bye.